It was a typical Saturday afternoon, and Chris Hemsworth had one goal in mind: to escape the chaos of his celebrity life and enjoy some anonymity in a quiet corner of the local mall. For someone who was constantly in the spotlight, the simple desire to experience life like everyone else seemed almost like a luxury. The paparazzi, the fans, the constant scrutiny. Chris longed for the kind of freedom that most people took for granted. So, he made a conscious decision to trade in his usual red carpet attire, tailored suits, crisp shirts, and polished shoes for something far more casual: a simple hoodie and a pair of dark sunglasses. The outfit was a calculated choice, one that would hopefully keep his identity hidden. He wasn't here to make headlines, but to blend in, to walk among the masses, and simply take in the humdrum of ordinary life. The goal wasn't to be noticed or admired. It was to escape his role as Thor for just a few hours. Chris entered through the mall's grand doors, feeling the cool, air-conditioned breeze wash over him as he stepped inside. The sound of his footsteps reverberated off the polished marble floor, creating a quiet rhythm as he moved forward. The vast open space of the mall stretched before him, filled with the steady buzz of weekend shoppers. People walked in pairs or groups, some focused on their shopping lists, others chatting as they strolled aimlessly. He couldn't help but smile a little, watching how different this scene was from his usual hectic life. Today, he wasn't a movie star with a million people watching his every move. He was just another face in the crowd. Moving past the various storefronts, he glanced at the window displays, but none of the products caught his attention. Instead, he was more interested in the people, their ease, their laughter, their simple lives that didn't involve managing a career under a microscope. As he continued to wander deeper into the mall, a subtle shift occurred in the atmosphere. He became aware of a presence following him, almost like an unspoken energy that heightened his senses. It was the security guard, standing just outside the entrance to an upscale electronics store. The man was tall and burly, dressed in a dark uniform, his posture rigid and alert. Chris tried to ignore the sensation that he was being watched, but as his eyes flickered to the side, he couldn't help but notice the security guard's gaze subtly shift toward him. At first, Chris assumed it was nothing more than the usual professional vigilance of mall security, the kind of watchful eyes that were part of the environment. After all, every mall had their team of guards, each one tasked with keeping the place safe, monitoring the crowds for potential disturbances. It wasn't uncommon to be under the gaze of security, especially in a public space like this. He shrugged it off, thinking little of it as he walked further away. However, as the minutes passed, the sense of being observed grew more palpable. Chris noticed the security guard's attention was no longer flicking between various shoppers. Instead, it was now fixated on him with a subtle intensity. The guard's eyes narrowed just enough for Chris to feel the weight of scrutiny, as though the man was trying to place where he had seen Chris before. It was a strange sensation, something that Chris had grown accustomed to over the years. There were always people who recognized him, no matter how much he tried to blend in. He adjusted his sunglasses, hoping to block out the guard's prying gaze, but the uncomfortable feeling lingered. He quickened his pace, thinking that maybe he could avoid any confrontation. But before he could take another step, the security guard spoke, his voice cutting through the noise of the mall like a sharp knife. "Excuse me, sir," the guard said, his tone polite yet insistent. Chris froze. He wasn't sure whether the man had truly recognized him or if he was just being overly cautious. But the realization dawned on him that his carefully planned disguise might not be as effective as he'd hoped. "Security guard, hey, you!" Chris froze in his tracks, the sudden sharpness of the guard's voice pulling him back into reality. For a moment, he was caught off guard, unsure if the man was addressing him or someone else nearby. He glanced around the bustling mall, the sounds of conversation, footsteps, and the occasional ring of a cash register filling the air, but the security guard's gaze was unwavering, locked directly onto him. Security guard. "Yeah, you with the hoodie and sunglasses. You can't just walk around like that." The words hung in the air, and for a split second, Chris wasn't sure how to react. He had spent so much energy carefully crafting a disguise, yet here he was, being singled out in the most unexpected of ways. A slight unease crept up his spine, the calmness of the mall now feeling far more like a stage, with him under scrutiny. He hadn't expected this kind of attention, especially not over something as trivial as sunglasses. He had just wanted a normal, anonymous experience, but now, that simple wish seemed to be slipping further and further away. Turning toward the security guard, Chris tried to maintain a sense of composure, keeping his voice steady, even though he could feel the tension building. "Play it cool," he reminded himself. "Chris Hemsworth." "I'm sorry, what's the issue? I'm just walking around." His tone was casual, almost as if he were having a conversation with a friend, but inside, he felt his heart rate pick up just slightly. There was no reason to get rattled. After all, he hadn't done anything wrong. He wasn't causing any trouble. But the fact that the guard was so intent on engaging him made the situation feel a little too close to what he had been hoping to avoid. Attention. The security guard's response was swift, and there was no mistaking the seriousness in his words. "Security guard. You think you can just stroll through here wearing sunglasses? That's against mall policy. Take them off." Chris's eyebrows furrowed, a mix of confusion and irritation bubbling up inside him. Mall policy? He had heard of dress codes, but this felt absurd. The idea that sunglasses were against the rules seemed almost laughable, yet here he was, caught in a standoff. His mind raced. Was this a misunderstanding? Or was he just unlucky enough to attract attention in the wrong place at the wrong time? He hadn't anticipated such a rigid enforcement of minor details. What had started as a simple escape from the chaos of fame was now turning into an uncomfortable confrontation. "Chris Hemsworth, are you serious? Just for wearing sunglasses?" He wasn't trying to be difficult, but the absurdity of the situation was hard to ignore. Here he was, a man used to wearing sunglasses in public to maintain a degree of privacy, now being told it was somehow a violation of mall protocol. The tension in the air was palpable, and Chris could feel the eyes of a few passers-by shifting toward the scene unfolding between him and the guard. He had hoped for peace and anonymity, but instead he found himself in a far more complicated situation than he ever expected. And as the moments ticked by, he couldn't help but wonder how this would end. Would he be able to salvage the remainder of his quiet day, or was his brief escape from fame about to come to a very public and very unwanted end? "Chris Hemsworth. I didn't know there was a dress code for sunglasses. I'm just here to relax." Chris's voice carried a note of frustration now. It was becoming clear that this situation wasn't going to resolve itself easily, and his brief escape from the constant attention of being in the public eye was quickly slipping away. He had hoped for a relaxing moment, a break from his usual chaotic schedule, but instead, he found himself in the middle of an awkward confrontation. Despite his attempt to explain himself, the security guard wasn't backing down. The security guard, however, was unrelenting. He stepped closer, his body language signaling authority as he crossed his arms tightly over his chest. "Security guard. You're not above the rules. Take them off now, or I'll have to ask you to leave the premises." Chris's patience, which had been fairly thin to begin with, was now wearing even thinner. He had no intention of making a scene, but being told to follow a rule that felt both ridiculous and unnecessary pushed him to the edge. "Chris Hemsworth, I'm not causing any trouble. Just trying to enjoy a quiet day here." He wasn't sure if the guard heard him, or if the man was simply too focused on enforcing his interpretation of the rules to listen. Either way, the situation was spiraling, and the surrounding crowd was beginning to take notice. Their whispers and side glances were unmistakable. A few people had pulled out their phones, eager to capture what was becoming a bizarre spectacle. Feeling like he had no other choice, Chris finally took off his sunglasses and tucked them into his hoodie pocket, hoping this would diffuse the situation. He stood there for a moment, uncertain whether to just walk away or try to explain himself further. "Chris Hemsworth. There, happy now? I'm not here to break any rules." The guard continued to scrutinize him, his expression shifting from the determined, almost aggressive stance he had earlier to something softer, confused, perhaps even unsure. He studied Chris's face, taking a few seconds to process the situation. And then, In a shift of focus, the guard looked him over again, scanning him from head to toe. It was as if he were piecing together a puzzle but couldn't quite find the right fit. "Security guard, you look like that actor. What's his name?" Chris raised an eyebrow, an amused smirk forming on his face. He'd been through this many times before. Celebrities often got recognized in public, but the way the guard was hesitating told him he wasn't quite there yet. "ChrisHemsworth." "What's that?" The guard's eyes narrowed, studying Chris's face more closely now, the realization dawning on him. The pieces of the puzzle seemed to fall into place as recognition finally hit. "Security guard." "Oh my God, you're Chris Hemsworth, aren't you?" Chris couldn't hold back a small chuckle, amused by the turn of events. He leaned in slightly, speaking clearly, but with a touch of humor in his voice. "Chris Hemsworth." "Yeah, that's me. Chris Hemsworth. You know, the guy who plays Thor?" The moment those words left Chris's mouth, the guard's face turned a shade paler, his eyes widening in shock. His mouth opened, but for a few seconds, no words came out. It was as if the guard was searching for a response, but couldn't quite find one. The awkwardness of the moment felt almost suffocating, and Chris couldn't help but find the humor in it all. "Security guard. Oh, my God, I didn't recognize you. I'm so sorry. I thought you were just some guy being rude. I didn't mean to. I didn't know." Chris could feel the heat of the moment shift from awkwardness to a more lighthearted tension as several shoppers nearby started snickering. Some had even pulled out their phones, ready to capture the uncomfortable moment. Chris couldn't help but think this would probably end up as yet another viral video on the internet. Ever the professional, Chris took a deep breath, letting the awkwardness roll off him. He flashed a friendly smile, trying to diffuse the situation with his usual charm. "Chris Hemsworth." "Hey, no worries, you just did your job. But maybe, next time, don't assume someone's causing trouble without knowing who they are." The crowd around them started to loosen up, the tension dissipating as they witnessed the guard's flustered apology. Chris had managed to turn the situation around, but it had certainly been a strange and unexpected detour on his quest for anonymity. As he walked away, he couldn't help but laugh to himself. Even on his day off, it seemed, he couldn't escape the chaos of fame. "Security guard. I swear I didn't mean to disrespect you. I was just following mall policy. I didn't expect you to be here, Mr. Hemsworth. I'm really sorry." Chris could see the genuine embarrassment on the security guard's face, and while the situation had been a bit awkward, he wasn't about to let the guy off the hook. It was clear the guard had been doing his job, even if he had been a little too strict with the rules. Chris couldn't help but chuckle softly, his usual easygoing nature taking over, as he realized how flustered the man was. "Chris Hemsworth. It's all right. I've had worse moments. At least you didn't ask me to leave for not following the rules. Though if you did, I might have had to use some Thor power on you." The security guard, still red-faced, managed a nervous laugh, clearly relieved by Chris's good-natured response. His earlier embarrassment seemed to melt away a bit, and Chris could tell that the guy was just trying to make up for his mistake. "Security guard. I can't believe this. I'm so sorry. If you want, I'll make sure no one bothers you for the rest of your visit. I'll keep a lookout. Please, just let me know if you need anything." Chris appreciated the offer, and it was clear the guard genuinely wanted to make things right. He gave him a reassuring nod, not wanting to make him feel worse than he already did. "Chris Hemsworth. Thanks. It's all good. Just a little advice for next time. Maybe start with a hi instead of, 'Hey, you.'" The security guard laughed nervously, trying to hide his embarrassment. It was clear he was grateful for Chris's understanding. "Security guard. Right. Hi, Mr. Hemsworth. How can I help you today?" Chris couldn't help but smile, his tone light and friendly as he turned to leave. The guard had learned his lesson, and the whole situation was starting to feel like a funny story rather than an awkward confrontation. As Chris began walking toward the exit, a few fans, having recognized him, started approaching for selfies and autographs. Chris was more than happy to oblige, turning the awkward moment into something fun. He made small talk with the fans, even joking about the bizarre mall experience. It felt good to connect with people in this casual way, far removed from the glitz and glamour of red carpets. The security guard, still recovering from the earlier incident, stood by, watching with a mix of relief and admiration as Chris interacted with the fans. Before Chris walked out the door, he gave the guard an encouraging thumbs up, signaling that everything was okay. Security guard. I'm never going to live this down. Chris chuckled to himself as he walked out, still smiling at the absurdity of the whole situation. It hadn't been the quiet, anonymous day he had planned, but it had certainly been a memorable one that he could laugh about later. The next day, as he scrolled through his phone, he couldn't help but notice the viral memes circulating about the encounter. People had latched onto the awkward moment, and he was tagged in thousands of posts. To his surprise, the security guard had even become the subject of a few memes himself. Chris had never imagined that his simple trip to the mall would result in a viral sensation, but here he was, laughing along with the internet as his unintentional moment of public humiliation became a comedic goldmine for fans everywhere. It wasn't the kind of fame he was used to, but it certainly gave him a new, more lighthearted perspective on the sometimes chaotic nature of his celebrity life. 40 Minis.